we can note things for voting if needed. Registration for virtual public comment has closed. We do have individuals who have signed up to virtually provide public comment. Such comment will be limited to 2 minutes at the discretion of the chair. I also note that members of the public who wish to comment on an agenda item may do so by sending an email to varedist@dls.virginia.gov. The comment will be posted on the division's website at https://virginiaredistricting.org. Additionally, this meeting is being translated simultaneously in Spanish. If you would like to watch the hearing in Spanish, please send an email to varedistricting2021@gmail.com to receive a link to be admitted to the Spanish translation Zoom meeting. This is for viewing and listening only, and not for providing comment. And are Esmail or Mindy on here to provide the additional instruction?
Morning, Madam Chair, Mindy Carlin. For those who have the link and would like to listen to this meeting in Spanish, please go to the bottom of your screen and click the interpretation globe on the far right and select the Spanish channel. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And one more time for members who would like to comment on today's meeting, the email address is varedist@dls.virginia.gov. Okay, and we do have, let me just look at the public comment. Just for the public commenters, so you know, we are going to be having public comment earlier rather than later. The first issue I think we need to address is today is October 11th, 2021. It is our deadline. And the question would be to council, is there something that we would need to affirmatively do, not do? Just procedurally with regard to 14 days, do we need to have a vote? Is that something that needs to be, does it do 14 days automatically commence unless we vote otherwise? Or if the deadline passes, is that done without action or without affirmatively invoking? So if I could, anyone can jump in right now. Let me see if there are any hands up. Is Jerry on here? Or Brian, are you on here?
Good morning, Madam Co-Chair. I am. I believe Dr. Creighton has his hand raised. I don't know if you can see that on there, but
I can't.
Yeah.
I can't see any of that. Well, Dr. Creighton, go ahead. Could you just give us some direction on that piece?
Good morning. I actually thought Brian was going to go first, but I'm happy to do so here, and I'm sure they'll have additional thoughts. I think that there seems to be some difference, I wouldn't say difference of opinion, but there are different approaches to how to understand this 14 days. I think regardless of whether you think it is automatic or whether you think it needs to be formally invoked, if it is the commission's determination that, at least with respect to some of the districts, certainly the state legislative districts that are due now, that there's not going to be an intention to move further, a statement would be sufficient. One could style that as a vote, but I think that if there isn't sufficient support to go forward, recording it as such would be a useful step so that there is no equivocation about where the commission is with respect to that part of the process. Now, of course, it may be with respect to both state legislative and congressional, but whatever that is, I think a clear statement would be this, the sure sign of buttoning matters up would be my recommendation.
Okay, and Brian, do you have something additional to that? I mean, we cannot vote today. We're not in person. Ms. Harris and I determined that it would just be better for everyone to be virtual today. So we could theoretically have a vote on Thursday when we're scheduled to meet in person, if to make sure that the will of the commission is being represented. Do you have something additional?
And Madam Co-Chair, actually, Mr. Bartolomucci is going to take this question if that's all right. He has our answer on this one. So
okay.
Madam Co-Chair, this is Chris Bartolomucci. the statute governing the commission, in particular, Virginia Code 30-397, says that if the commission fails to submit a plan for districts by the deadline, the commission shall have 14 days following its initial failure to submit a plan to the General Assembly. So as I read that, if you don't submit a plan, the additional 14 days is automatically triggered. So as I read it, there's nothing the commission needs to do. It doesn't have to take a vote or issue a statement. Just the failure to submit a plan automatically triggers the 14-day period, as I read 30-397.
Do you find any, well, okay. That sort of leaves things up in the air right now. Do you recommend does either council recommend having a vote on Thursday?
I don't think it's necessary.
I think that it really depends on what you want to, if we want to say for certain, kind of like Dr. Creighton said, that if we want to say for sure we're not doing legislative maps, I think that 14 days runs, you don't have to vote. If you want to say conclusively, you're not moving forward, I mean, I guess you could take a vote. That would just put the Supreme Court on notice, I think, to the extent they aren't already. But I think Chris is right. You don't have to do anything. The 14 days is triggered kind of regardless. It's more, when do we want the Virginia Supreme Court starting, if that's where we are.
Okay.
And this is Madam Co-Chair. Just
is that Kareem?
This is Kareem Creighton. Yes.
This is much more difficult than being in person.
No worries.
Go ahead.
Kareem Creighton here. I would just add, I think Brian's last point about giving notice to the Supreme Court is useful. To be thinking about this, not just from the perspective of the commission, but of course, as judges I've worked for said in the past, people want an answer, and ultimately, right, voters and local jurisdictions will need to start work at some point. And the sooner, if it's the commission's determination that the legislative districts aren't to be drawn, the sooner there's some definitive statement about what the intentions of the commission are, the sooner I think the court and the next stages of this process can get going, or at least they can have the decision to, move forward or not in front of them. I just think ultimately, if districts have to be drawn, precincts have to be crafted, it would be important sooner rather than later to give an affirmative statement to that effect.
Okay, thank you for that. And I know Delegate Simon has a question, I think. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, yeah. So I've been thinking about this, and I submitted, I think, this question through you and Greta to the council so they can think about this issue as well. I think another way to look at it might be, another way to sort of bring some closure to it. When we first met on August 16th to discuss the timeline, I think both sets of council said that the safest approach to our timeline and deciding when we received census data and when we should count time from would have been to go with August 12th as the date we received the census data. That we'd be least likely to be sued for, but there was a legally defensible argument for using the 26th. As it happens, if we were to revisit that decision and say, hey, you know what, particularly since there are folks out in the world that are involved in lawsuits around our work that have said that they think that the only legally proper position is August 12th. One approach might be to revisit our decision to use August 26th as the start date and go back and say, you know what, the census data was released and we did get it. It went to Citygate Partners first, but we did get data on August 12th, measured the timeline from them. That would have meant our 45 days plus the 14 would have expired yesterday or today. That would sort of close the door on the state legislative maps, put the legislative leaders on notice that they need to have this week to provide their list of special masters to the Supreme Court, and still gives us 14 days to do the congressional maps, which is about a day difference than I think it would be otherwise. So I don't know if the council had looked at that idea and if they had any thoughts about it. I know Chris looks like he does, but Madam Chair, back to you.
Chris?
Yeah, Chris Bartolomucci. Delegate Simon, actually, if we used August 12 as the start date, then the deadline for state district maps would have expired a couple weeks ago, and today would be the deadline for congressional maps. So I don't advise you to use August 12th as the start date. The October 25th deadline for congressional maps assumes the August 26th start date that the commission voted on back at the August 16 meeting, because it's 60 days from the start date. So August 26 plus 60 days gets you to October 25th. So I think the commission not revisit the decision it made a couple months ago.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate Simon.
Just quick, I understand that. I thought I saw a chart on the 16th of the, so wouldn't we also have, so suppose that today was the day for congressional maps and we didn't do it, doesn't that trigger another 14-day extension for us to do congressional maps? And so that was sort of the idea, is that yes, a couple of weeks ago, the deadline for the state legislative maps would have expired and our 14 days would have automatically kicked in. As you suggested, we didn't need to do anything to get our 14 days to start. We'd now be at the beginning, essentially, of the 14-day extension for congressional maps. Or do I have that timeline wrong?
No, that is true. You'd be in the 14-day overtime period if you assume August 12th is the start date. So, I mean, the commission could certainly, strive to produce its congressional maps in the next couple of weeks, and then that would avoid any issue about whether the start date should have been August 12th or not.
That was what I was thinking. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Dr. Creighton, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes, I would just offer just an administrative procedure point. I take the point that I think we all agreed to in August, that the safest of safe answers was taking it from the moment that the census issued some numbers. I think given where we are now, that raises an interesting and important question as to whether or not the change, if we were to change, is due to good reason, and it opens the door to an arbitrary and capricious claim, which I don't know we want to get into. But the main point I'm offering is it might have been the safe approach to take August 12th in August. I think now that we've chosen a route, unless we have a good reason that we want to document for doing so, that is changing to an initial decision that we would have taken in August to take the earliest date. It would probably raise more questions about why we moved from August in the first place and moved back to August 12th later. And I don't know that I can readily identify it without opening up another question that you probably don't want to have to spend time dealing with.
Understood. Mr. Kumar, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it could get messy in a lot of ways to revisit the timeline decision. I won't be able to attend on Thursday. So just speaking ahead to when that's likely when a vote would be, I'd be fine at this point if the chairs even decide to send some sort of a short memo or statement. I mean, the reality is we're going to discuss today, are we going to move forward on congressional maps, right? I mean, there's some overwhelming desire that people are like, there's really a chance for the state legislative maps, whether we put it to a vote, which could also lead to, I don't know, it could be unanimous or there could be posturing here and there, but the reality is, I don't see that happening. And if that's the assessment of the co-chairs, if it's the effect is really just to put the Supreme Court on notice that you can start your work, I'd be fine with that if that's the most efficient route.
And that's fine. I want to make sure that we are representing the consensus of the group, and that anyone could say their piece if they had some other reason why. I know there's a couple people who were adamant that work could be done. I don't count myself among that group, but certainly there are people and they may just want to put that out there, and that's fine. So I think we can table this at this point for Thursday for the official direction and move forward to, okay. What I'd like to do is hear public comment first and start there. And then after that, we've asked council to both kind of take a look at the citizen-driven maps. We're in a different position than we were originally with the state maps, where we really didn't have a whole lot to choose from. So we had both council go out and draw their own maps and do that. And then we got all of these wonderful citizen maps trickling in, and then we really didn't know how to put them all in together. Right now, you can go onto the website and there's a number of citizen maps for the congressional maps. And we asked council to kind of pick a couple of them and highlight them from my observations of those maps. We still have work to do on all of them because we have much tighter specifications. It has to be plus or minus one person. So there's work and maneuvering to be done. So the question is, do we have maybe a viable starting point from congressional maps? So just as a highlight of what we could be doing in the next, I'm hoping for maybe an hour of that, where we're just receiving information. With that, let's start with public comment. And Shay, who do we have on there? Is it, can I just call in the list of the attendees? Is that a useful way to do it? Okay. I will pull up the list. I see Andres Tobar. I see him over under attendees. Are we able to promote him?
Yes, he's been promoted.
Great. Mr. Tobar, if I pronounced that incorrectly, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Mr. Tobar, I think you're not coming through clearly. There may be a connection issue.
Again, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better, much better. Okay.
Can my 2 minutes begin now?
Absolutely. We will all pretend we didn't hear Alvin and the Chipmunks. So go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Andres Tovar. I'm the executive director of the Shirlington Employment and Education Center, an immigrant assistance program in Northern Virginia. And I'm also the volunteer executive director of the Virginia Latino Leaders Council, where Mr. Walter Tejada is the president, and we have several distinguished Latino members in the council. And that is the map that we submitted. The purpose of us submitting a map in light of all of the difficult decisions you folks are going to be making, assuming you reach a decision, is to at least allow you to hear from members of the Latino community. We know that as you make these decisions, you have to weigh the pros and cons and also the people that are voting. And so it is not our intent to try to displace or gerrymander folks, but rather we offer a map that is reasonable, that has it's called, we have 8 Latino opportunity districts, which are comprised of existing legislative districts, but augmenting the number of Latinos to participate, where when a vacancy occurs, it would be competitive for a Latino in the future. And there are also 29 districts that we have written up that are minority majority districts, that in the event of vacancies of current legislators, opportunities for minority representatives would be there. We wanted to present that to you as you consider the various options. And I would be very happy to submit the list of those districts, since we've renumbered them, to find out who is where. And again, we're just trying to be helpful, but we wanted to be heard as 10% of the population of Virginia. And whereas we only have 3 members in the House of Delegates and no members in the Senate, we figured it's time for Latinos to be at the table discussing with you who are making these decisions and asking you to, from a perspective of reasonableness and fairness, to offer Latinos an opportunity to get on the table. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the best of luck to all of you in a very, very difficult challenge that you have before you.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay, next we have Edward Strickler, followed by Nicole Merline, and then Robert Barnett.
Thank you, Edward Strickler here. First, public servants and public service do not get appreciation they deserve. So appreciation, I'll say that, appreciation, thank you. You've seen my email. If you have, you know I'm interested in your work for the Commonwealth. The commonwealth of all of us involves equity issues. I know you're struggling with those, but remember, from just a regular person sitting here, the common interest of communities is a shared set of interests, not just political affiliation or power brokering. So you know that, but just to hear that, I want to say, remember that on behalf of the Commonwealth, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strickler. Next, we have Nicole Merline.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the Commission, for all your work. Again, I know it's been hard, so we appreciate your persistence. I spoke the last time, and I just want to reiterate those comments, particularly since the Democratic map seems to have actually shifted over to the Republican map in areas of Arlington. Arlington County is currently being represented by 4 delegates, 1 being all in the county, and all maps now have us at 3 delegates with 0 representing all of the county, even with a significant and the most dense population in the entire Commonwealth. We, as I said before, have over 70% of our population living in either an apartment or condo, and these maps have essentially gerrymandered those that are able to afford single-family households into every single new, existing district. B7 is a map that seems to have gotten a lot of positive feedback from the community and does not, change significantly the representation in the area. For the 2 delegates that potentially would be at odds in McLean, there is now an open Senate seat. So this does not create an issue for incumbents, even though, again, I don't like that that's playing into it, but it is. So please consider allowing Arlington to at least have somewhat representative populations in the upcoming districts, and at least one that includes all of the county in one House of Delegates. I would like to speak in support of how you've drawn the Senate district. Obviously, it's primarily just the county, so that works well for everyone. And again, appreciate all of your work and best of luck.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Barnett, and then John Gurgley, and then Ankit Jain, and then Pete Costigan. So that is the order in which you will be called.
Good morning. My name is Robert Barnett. I'm the president of the Virginia State Conference, NAACP. We ask that the commission remember its commitment to ensuring that voters of color do not have their democratic power diluted. The 2021 Virginia Voting Rights Act has passed. This law explicitly makes it unconstitutional in Virginia to have political processes that are not equally open to participation by members of a protected class. This means that the commission cannot create districts that provide less opportunity for communities of color to elect representatives of their choice than the current maps do. Where racially polarized voting exists and there is a significant large community of color, the maps must be drawn to give them an opportunity to elect representatives. We ask that the commission maintain the minority districts without packing or cracking Black voters. This will ensure that voters of color are able to elect representatives of their choice without making an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. 2010 cycle maps were all challenged in the court. Of these 3 maps drawn for the state districts, only 1 avoided significant editing by the court. 2 were largely redrawn. As a result, the lawsuits, the federal Senate districts were not finalized until 2016, and congressional districts were not finalized to 2018. And so we ask that the commission focus on communities of color as a major factor of making maps. Communities of interest are part of redistricting criteria in Virginia and should be at the forefront. Communities of interest are defined broadly and include those with similar social, economic, and cultural interests. And so we ask that commission keep these things in mind in drawing these maps. Thank you, Madam Chair, for this time.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. And next we'll do John Gurgley.
Not here, ma'am.
Ankit Jain.
Hi, thank you all for giving me a chance to speak. My name is Ankit Jain. I'm coming to you from Vienna, Virginia. I wanted to offer 2 thoughts. I'm really hoping that y'all are able to make the congressional maps work. And so I think 2 things that I would like to suggest. One is that I'm begging you to hire 1 map drawer and not 2. I think we can all agree that the 2 map drawers thing didn't work the last time. I don't think it's going to work this time. So I'm really, really hoping you all don't do that this time. I think that was one of the biggest own goals of this process so far. And if I remember correctly, DLS had offered to do the congressional maps. So maybe you can hire someone from DLS to do that. So that would be one suggestion I have. And the second, I don't want to get too partisan. I am a Democrat, but I feel like there needs to be more of a willingness among some of the Republican commissioners to compromise. And I feel like that's what derailed some of the initial process. You saw, it seemed like the whole process, you'd see some of the Democrat commissioners offer kind of reasonable compromises and they would just be voted down 8-8 every time. And that really, ended with what we saw at the last meeting, where it was a 50-50 map. One house gets the Democratic map to start, one house gets the Republican map. Even that wasn't good enough. And so I feel like, if we're going to make this work, there needs to be compromise on both sides. But right now it seems like it's only coming from one side. And so I really think that we need to come at this with a spirit of compromise if we're going to get anything done. Otherwise, we're just going to have these maps drawn by SCOBA as well. And I think that nobody wants that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And last person that I have is Pete Costigan.
Good morning. Good morning. Hold on a second. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, commissioners. First, I'd like to, given what happened at Friday's meeting, I'm echoing here, pain in the butt. Given what happened on Friday's meeting, I've decided to share some experience of mine that may actually be encouraging. I've been advocating for redistricting reform on election days for the last 5 years. I started out in my own voting precinct in Greene County, Then I ventured into the county's other 4 precincts. And finally, during last year's extended voting period, to precincts in Charlottesville and surrounding Albemarle County to the south of Greene. I made a conscious decision to chat with voters in several different precincts. I wanted to interact with voters of all political leanings, of different racial backgrounds, of apparently varied economic backgrounds, and finally, of greater to lesser knowledge or interest in redistricting reform. I reasoned that going to different precincts was a good way to achieve this diversity. It was. Over the year, I and many others have probably spoken to thousands of Virginians, first seeking their support of a yes vote from the General Assembly on the proposed amendment, and then encouraging voters to vote yes on the ballot amendment in last November's election. In many cases, I was preaching to the choir, but many others quickly became the believers once we discussed the democracy-deadening effects of gerrymandering. Based on my experience with voters, I want to remind you of something you may already know well. Many Virginians are counting on you to fix this thing. They may not speak at meetings or comment on the maps posted, but they are watching and hoping for a change. Maybe you should think of them as Virginia's new silent majority. You should definitely think of them as Virginia's majority. One final point. During your Friday, October 8th meeting, Meg Lamb posted House of Delegates map B7 to the website. That map, B7, included changes that I and others had proposed to HOD map B6 during the Central Region's virtual meeting on Wednesday, October 6th. Map B7 also may have included changes proposed by citizens during the 2 virtual meetings held on Thursday, October 7th. I urge the Commission to work from those maps that include the most current input from citizens. Finally, this morning you discussed the possibility of working on the congressional maps for now. Under the circumstances, I think that's a very good decision, and hopefully you'll be able to return to the House of Delegate and State Senate maps at a later date before the deadline. Thanks very much, and sorry for the messed up communication. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is I don't have any other people. Is there any other, Shay, is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we will move on to congressional maps. Let's start with who's presenting. Can we start with Brian or Chris, or I don't know who's presenting these things.
Madam Co-Chair, this is Brian Tyson. I didn't know if it might be helpful for the commission if Mr. Morgan could just kind of walk through what the existing map looks like with the 2020 data applied, if that would help as a starting point.
Like the current map?
It would just to show kind of where the population changes are, if you wanted to do that, or how you wanted to proceed. We're kind of ready to do whatever you'd prefer on that.
I would prefer, I think, just to start with the citizen maps and just see what we're looking at first before we start comparing. I think we just want to see what's out there and see if you and I almost just said opposing counsel, my apologies, but other counsel, all of our counsel are on kind of a similar direction in viable citizen options, if we can kind of just feel that out first. So were you able to find kind of 3 options from the citizen maps that look good or viable that could be easily maneuvered? Is that in the cards?
So the short answer is not exactly in terms of what we looked at. We looked through those. I see that Creighton has his hand raised too. There's a couple of things kind of perimeter wise that might be helpful to talk about for the citizen plans.
Okay.
But in the short version is that there's kind of a lot of moving pieces, and especially as we look at all the considerations in terms of Voting Rights Act and other pieces that go into the congressional maps. I think there's some things we did talk through on the citizen maps on that. But Dr. Creighton may have something to start with that may be more helpful.
Okay, and we can certainly circle back to what the current map shows and why we're just looking for something that can be a starting point, essentially. Dr. Creighton.
Madam Co-Chair, thank you. I want to echo, I think, some of what Brian said. I think I appreciate the interest in looking at the citizen maps, and I think that is something that obviously needs to be brought into the conversation. But in order to assess what the citizen maps do and don't do well, I think we need to start from first principles. And I do think it would be useful, before we even talk about, the ins and outs of the maps, what is it that we think legally needs to happen? And that goes in some ways to the considerations that you all articulated with the state legislative maps. But I think if we talk about principles, I'm happy and ready to do that. 3 simple principles, and then move from that, if there's some joint understanding about it, to assessing what each of the citizen maps do. I think that would be a useful sort of starting point, because I fear, based on our experience, that if we get into maps, either a discussion by the map drawers or a suggestion that we look into what each of the citizen maps do, we're going to see some problems. And I think really the big tectonic issues of like population shifts, Voting Rights Act matters as they're currently represented in the map are things that I think council can talk through in very simple terms before we even get to conversations about our map drawers. I think at this point, for us to have a productive conversation, I think it would be important to see first if we can get to those governing principles first. Is that, I just want to throw that out as an idea. Obviously, it's your choice.
I think that's fine. And again, we are virtual, so I think we are limited on the amount of, I guess, debate we're going to be having. And this is more of a question and answer session to see what are our options, what's the best path forward, and for y'all to share with us your concerns, highlight some good ideas, and do it that way. And then when we talk on Thursday, will be a more meaty conversation. So Mr. Abrinio's hand is up.
And Madam Chair, if in that discussion, perhaps to help us, since we at least have some working knowledge of what the criteria were, the state map, maybe you could help distinguish why congressional maps and the criteria are different, just to help us educate us. Sure.
So I think that's a good path forward. Okay, so Kareem, Dr. Creighton, did you want to kind of then start there, and then we'll have Mr. Tyson provide additional insight?
I'm happy to, and Kareem is always fine. So we've, so far, as all of you all know, have dealt with state legislative maps. And for state legislative and local maps, generally speaking, federal law has less to say and more latitude that they offer to states and local jurisdictions because they differ so much. And so, for example, our deviation rules generally leave wide latitude for the state to choose a very narrow construction, like a ±1 deviation, where equality is almost, arithmetically perfect compared to a situation like the one we've looked at, ±5% deviation. By contrast, Congress, for a long set of reasons, I'll wait. Okay, so Congress, because of a long seminar explanation we don't have to go into today, because let's just say for the moment, it is governed primarily by federal law because they're related to federal districts, are governed by a much more tight set of constraints. States still can impose policy differences, but they have to do so in a very narrow set of constraints that the federal government offers. The most significant one has been referenced earlier. Governing case law tells us that our deviation needs to be ±1 or as near to zero as practicable, as the language from Karcher versus Daggett, a Supreme Court decision. But essentially, we're encouraged by the court, in fact, ordered by the court, to create district populations as nearly equal as possible. You can deviate from that if you'd like, but to do it, you need to do so with very good reasons, because the court will look very closely to see whether or not there's a compelling enough reason to go, say, beyond the ±1% deviation. So generally, the recommendation at Congress, you do a much tighter job of keeping populations together. Obviously, because you're dealing with bigger numbers, there are also sort of more choices that one can make about communities of interest. But before you get to sort of your versions of communities of interest that we've been talking about, sort of lower down the chain on considerations, we have to deal with, of course, the Voting Rights Act. Generally, the same law applies. That is, there's a guarantee under Section 2 that there be equal opportunity to elect candidates of choice. That usually says that you can't craft districts that pack or stack, overly concentrates or overly disperses minority citizens. At the same time, and you've heard this one before, we also have to be mindful of not taking race too significantly, such that it is the predominant consideration above all of the traditional factors that the commission has adopted. And so you can't start, as happened in the 2010 process, saying we need to have, without data supporting it, a certain percentage or a certain number of African-American majority districts or a certain racial percentage, knowing nothing else. And so those are the cases where usually the court is going to ask hard questions. Did you take race above other considerations in crafting the districts? Now, just the last point, as a historical matter, of course, Virginia has sort of moved in different directions about crafting these districts. At present, there are 2 congressional districts that have been a subject of court debate, and Special Master drew them in a manner that actually puts an effective percentage of minority political opportunity somewhere in the 40s. That's Districts 3 and District 4. So if you think about those districts in the same way that we did in talking about the House of Delegate District, District 77, for example, this was a place in which a special master looked at the context, the circumstances in the locality, and made a determination about what the appropriate percentage was of African Americans. The legislature initially drew it above, pretty significantly above 50%. The special master, in looking at all of the relevant considerations, drew both those districts, Districts 3 and District 4, below 50%. So you can assume, and again, I leave the space open for debate about this. I don't think there should be, but just in case, those 2 percentages represent the special master's best estimate of what fair political opportunity looks like in compliance with Section 2 and other governing federal law. So you should be thinking about that, as well as, and I'll just say this and stop, of course, Virginia's commitment to political opportunity, and that would apply statewide. And you might think about how that informs the crafting of districts elsewhere. Just to save time, I'm just going to make 2 other points about just sort of how we should think about this map. And I don't think I'm overstepping, but if I am, I'll seek your forgiveness later. You've got population shift, obviously, where there's a lot more population in the northern part of the state, a lot less population than there used to be in the southwestern part of the state. It is also fair to say that the districts that we are looking at right in the middle are going to be a source of, I think, a lot of consideration as to whether they should remain in the configuration that they are, and if so, what are the justifications? So I'll stop there. I'm sure Brian and Chris may have more to add about that.
Brian or Chris?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So number one, I think that Dr. Creighton just gave y'all a great summary of what you need to be thinking about for these issues. The deviation is going to be a lot more difficult. Those are exactly the kinds of considerations that the commission needs to look at. Now, and that last point on the Voting Rights Act, I think, is where some of the citizen maps were challenging, given that you had Districts 3 and 4, they're created the way they were created. I only found just a couple of citizen plans that really even kind of took that into account in terms of drawing that part of the state. And that, I think, was some of the concern, is a lot of people were doing the logical thing you would do. You would try to, put jurisdictions together, draw nice compact districts, and not recognizing necessarily that there are these voting rights considerations down in that southeastern side of the state of Virginia or the Commonwealth, and trying to figure out what that looks like. So I think that's where it makes it a little bit challenging in terms of a starting point of using the citizen maps as a starting point, because most of them were not taking those kinds of issues into account. In terms of kind of thinking about what makes the most sense and how y'all want to go about this or work through a process, I have a couple I could put up on the screen and we could look at together if that would be helpful for the commission. Or the other option is that we could all kind of study the various pieces and look at, does the commission want to move to a process of kind of drawing maps itself together, like we're doing it as a group and kind of thinking through that process. So that'd be my thing. I think the main difference and the main challenges with the citizen maps, there are those voting rights considerations, which were not necessarily taken into account. And I think there's going to be a lot of agreement on voting rights issues. I think it's going to be a little different than the legislative plans because you're dealing with much larger populations. And so it's a situation where when you had like one House district or two delegate districts, those are going to be, there's a lot more easier to draw kind of majority districts or not majority and kind of have that whole discussion we had. But the congressional, you're dealing with, over 700,000 people per district. And so it's a little bit different look in terms of how those will come together as we go. But I'll pause there and see what makes the most sense and how y'all like to proceed with that.
Well, I'm going to ask a question. I haven't thought this one through. Is it easier or more difficult? Are we starting with the current map? Is that a bad idea or is that a useful thing, since there are some things that were already done that were good ideas? Or is the population control or the population shifts, is that just throwing everything? We're going to have to redo it all anyway. What are your thoughts there just as a starting point? Like if we're going to draw maps as a commission, what does that look like? Where do we start? We have to have a starting point. Is it easier to start with the two districts in the middle that had the voting rights thoughts already there and work around everything else? Or do we start in Southwest where there's kind of one line, or we're either using the city or we're not using the city? I think when I was looking at the citizen maps, which brings a whole lot of the population in. So I'll throw that out there, and then if we could hear from Dr. Creighton. And well, can I hear from Senator Barker first, and then Dr. Creighton, and then back to Mr. Tyson?
Yes, just quickly on one issue. One of the things that is different when it relates to the congressional districts is that the members of Congress are not required to live in their district, so that the residence is not an issue as it relates to this matter there. And I think make sure that everybody understands that, and we don't have to take that into consideration at all.
Thank you for clarifying that. I did not know that. So, and then Dr. Creighton.
Thanks, Madam Co-Chair. As to your question, what is the appropriate starting point? Should you start from the current map? I think, I suspect there are going to be people who are resistant. I remember that, let me put it this way. I recall that there was resistance to starting with the existing map as we dealt with the state legislative districts. I want to at least suggest that there are parts of this map that are advisable to start with for legal reasons, and that relates to the voting rights districts in the southeastern part of the state. I say this because we know that this is a configuration that reflects the court's best thinking about what is an appropriate, if you will, entrenchment of political opportunity for racial minorities. And therefore, you wouldn't have the same kind of uncertainty about whether or not the districts that's constructed do the work. District 4 actually is very close to being the appropriate population, the ideal population. District 3 needs to pick up a little bit, but it would need to be contoured all that much to deal with the deviation question. I think there's an open question as to whether you wish to work from there. Let me offer you at least the pros and cons of that. Doing it, I think I will tell you from our perspective.
Just to kind of throw this out there for everyone, I think this should be a sort of a point that we discuss on Thursday. So everybody kind of start listening. If you have any questions, now is a great time to ask those questions. We're not making any decisions right now. But as Dr. Creighton goes through pros and cons, keep track of them, ask any follow-up questions, and then we'll hear from Mr. Tyson. But no decisions are being made. We just want information on our options right now. So I apologize for the interruption. Dr. Creighton, please continue.
Not at all. I'm all for clarity here. So the pros and cons are not all that different from what we talked about the last time with state legislative maps. People are familiar with what the existing map looks like. And that is not to say that the existing map is a work of art. It is to say that it is useful as a point of reference to change things. I think there are very few people who will tell you districts 5, 6, and 7 are sort of what we would say is the best anti-gerrymandering configuration that you'll ever see on the planet. That is, these are districts that if you actually looked at it from a compactness score, most measures, you'd say there's something artificial, probably maneuvering. There's a lot of maneuvering that went into crafting these districts. I don't know who did it. I wasn't here in 2010. But what I would say, these are areas where there would need to be some shifting, not just for population reasons, but also compactness reasons, et cetera. Having that conversation might be useful if we're starting from this position where people know what these districts are and can tell you what's wrong with those districts. Similarly, so for District 9, I think partly because of our conversation about the West, understanding what needs to change about District 9, and it has to change because the population is too low, where it should move and where it shouldn't move should be something that people can discuss. The con of it, although I don't think that there's much of a con as before, as Senator Barker mentioned, the same considerations for incumbency aren't there as they used to be. Obviously, what goes with what, that is, which county should be matched with other counties, might be an issue. I recall a lot of conversation about the areas of District 5, taking things from the Southland and going south side and moving northward might be an issue. But again, understanding where that cutoff might be, if you were going to reshuffle that deck for District 5, that might be more informed if you've got an existing template to go off of. Doesn't mean that we can't think about other citizen maps and the like, but I think on balance, the pros of dealing with at least the map that you may want to change are better than the cons. And using a template for reshuffling different parts of the map, particularly in the center of the state, might be heavily informed by what we see in other citizen maps. I'll stop there.
Okay, so as our options are right now, and maybe there's other options, but we could potentially start with the current map and get feedback and adjust based on what's wrong with all those districts. We could take a couple things that we like from the current map and then as a commission draw lines around the rest based on feedback, or we could start with a completely blank map. Those would be the most viable options. I just want to clarify that, and then I'm going to send it to Brian. Did I characterize that correctly, Dr. Creighton?
Can I suggest to limit it to 2 options? I think option A is take districts 3 and 4 and decide how you want to fill in the rest.
Okay.
Option B is to take the whole map, recognizing that 3 and 4, the Voting Rights Act related districts are there, and then recognizing that you're going to make some changes, but use the discussion as a starting point about what's wrong with the rest of the map that you don't want to have in the new map. I would just limit it to those 2. But again, there's a lot of stuff in the middle, but that I would start our conversation that way.
Okay. Mr. Tyson?
Yes, so I think that Dr. Creighton's exactly right in terms of kind of where we need to be thinking about this. We need to kind of step back for a minute and remember that Dr. Palmer's racial polarization analysis tells us where the racially polarized voting in Virginia is. And it's definitely in the areas covered by districts 3 and 4 as they're currently constituted. So I would agree with the recommendation that we need to start with kind of the voting rights piece. I think that makes the most logical sense. Whether you need to kind of go with exactly the court order boundaries or look more at that, but I think we have to take a look at voting rights compliance for those districts first. On the remainder of the map, I think that Dr. Creighton kind of laid out correctly what your options are there. I mean, there's probably some value in seeing the existing boundaries. People tend to be a little bit more tied to congressional than they do some other the other pieces. That being said, the population changes are going to dictate a lot of this. So you have your current District 9 that's about 90,000 people short. It's going to need a lot of people, and it covers a lot of that Southwest Virginia area. So I think that once you get your voting rights districts right, it's almost, you can be aware of your current boundaries, be aware of some of the other pieces, but it may make sense to kind of begin filling those other ones in as the commission sees fit, which again kind of leads back to, I think, the larger question of, do we want to just be doing a least changes plan off an existing plan? And if you want to do kind of a least changes off of the existing districts, then I think that there also needs to be some kind of evaluation of the existing districts from a partisan perspective. I mean, you want to make sure what you're modifying isn't locking in a partisan outcome if that's the case. Starting from a kind of more blank plan in the congressional, I think assists with that a little bit. But again, I'm not saying that Creighton was advocating for least changes, but I think that if the idea is you want to take the existing districts and move them as little as possible to make them whole, that's a different approach than saying get the voting rights districts right and then start filling in the rest of the state as you're drawing, recognizing you got these very tight population tolerances. It doesn't matter where the members live, but there may be groups of counties, those communities of interest may figure in a little more in terms of crossing mountain ranges, various pieces like that are probably going to matter a little more in this context.
Question, and this is for Meg, we have the current maps up, the current congressional map is up, and do we have feedback that's got stuff on it, correct?
That map is
on.
That map is posted on our website on the tool that people could comment on. I haven't checked to see if anyone's left comments on the current districts, but I assume they would.
Okay, I would encourage everyone out there that's messaged to the public, please go comment on that map so we've got something to work with as soon as possible. And I think you have already. I know District 5 had a lot of thoughts. So just anything additional, I think we'll at a minimum be looking at those comments in that map for some guidance, at least at the outset, no matter which direction we go. So we would love to have that feedback sooner rather than later, or additionally, I think there's already some on there. Dr. Creighton?
Thank you. I will, confirm. I've looked a few times, and after you directed us to take a look, there is robust, I think, public comment about it. And so my comments about 5, 6, and 7 match what you said, in part because I saw a lot of feedback about it. I want to offer to Brian's point about sort of the partisan, the commitment to be aware of undue partisan advantage and disadvantage. I think that, applies, of course, because it was in state law and sort of affects the state legislative and congressional districts. I think 2 points are worth noting here, and I tend to agree. You could start this from a least changes approach. I'm suggesting definitely, I would say, least changes for the Voting Rights Act districts, unless we want to have a much deeper conversation. What we do the rest of the map is up to you, but whether we take the least changes or fresh map approach for the rest of the map, what I would encourage you to think about are 2 things. One, that we don't have any, as Brian mentioned, we don't have a requirement that there be incumbents living in the districts they currently represent. But 2, in terms of a standard of partisan fairness, we need to make certain that we know 2 things. One, the district configurations as presently organized offer 7 Democrats and 4 Republican incumbents. We also know that statewide elections since 2012 have all gone for Democrats, and the average win of those candidates, taking all of them into account since 2012, is 54%. That doesn't mean that it has to be exactly 54%, but that is one data point for us to assess when we think about undue burden or benefit, how that, whatever the balance is that we come up with, relates to that outcome. So it would be strange indeed, for example, not saying anybody advocates it, but it would be strange indeed to have more Republican districts than Democratic districts, given what we know about the electoral trends in the state. So we should be thinking about that, perhaps on the back end, but that's a feature that we need to think about in crafting these districts.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Simon?
Question for both. I hear you on 3 and 4. I guess my question is, if anybody's looked at whether there is a possibility of getting a third opportunity district or not, or based on the racially polarized data and the demographics, is two sort of the floor, or is there a way to look for an additional district for voting rights purposes, or just one under the Virginia State Code looks for opportunities for coalition districts? Has anybody looked at that question? Or if not, I mean, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but it seems like we shouldn't just assume that it's going to be the two we've already got if there's an opportunity for another.
Madam Co-Chair?
Yes, Dr.
This
Creighton.
is Kareem Creighton. I would just say, Delegate Simon, that is exactly why I brought up state law to begin with. It is indeed one of the things that I think beyond 3 and 4 that should be under consideration as we look at the rest of the map. Certainly, as we saw in Northern Virginia, there are possibilities of crafting districts that would bridge multiple racial minority groups in a way that would make them either a majority of the population by combining groups, or perhaps a significant or plurality population, and working with other groups, whether white or otherwise, could effectively entrench political opportunity. So that might be one of the many ways in which you might think about how basically Central and Northern Virginia might be crafted.
And Madam Co-Chair, Brian Tyson. So Delegate Simon, we have not yet looked at that particular question. I'll say number one. Number two, I think it's important to remember that the areas with racially polarized voting are the areas where these considerations come into play. We obviously, that's a little bit different in Northern Virginia. I think that the Virginia state laws, as we talked back and forth, you can look at some of those pieces. We can have those conversations when we get there, but we haven't yet kind of framed up whether or not there are additional opportunity or additional ability to elect districts. I don't expect there will be in the areas with racially polarized voting, because I think they're pretty much already covered, and that's what we'll need to look at for that purpose.
So can we look at that for Thursday's more robust conversation and have some more information about options there? And then I want to put this to the attorneys, and then we'll go to Senator Barker. Is there a way to accomplish, I mean, we've heard a lot about Republican versus Democrat in the political fairness component. How do we address all of the independents in Virginia and try to get somewhere that's the toss-ups? You know, how do we get to that and get some more sort of purple options? That would be my biggest question, is to accommodate. We have a bunch of independents, but elections don't necessarily reflect that. They reflect people going to the polls and picking perhaps the lesser of two evils. And so that's what I would like to focus on is there a way for everybody to move towards some of these places that are competitive as opposed to one or the other? So we're looking at, you know, maybe there's some Republican seats, maybe there's Democrat seats, and then there's toss-ups, the true toss-ups where like, they're toss-ups, but it's going to go Republican or it's going to go Democrat. So that's my question to council and map drawers. Is that a place we can get? Senator Barker.
Yes, Senator Locke actually has extensive experience in congressional maps. She did introduce a bill with a congressional map in 2011. That bill was passed in the Senate, but it was not passed in the House. It was a different map that was passed in the House. And then the next year, when the Senate flipped it in terms of parties, what happened then was that the House map was what was adopted. But she had addressed the issues that were contained in the suit that was instituted that led to the creation of the 3rd and 4th districts as they are. And actually, her map in 2011 was fairly similar to what the court ended up imposing there. Then after the suit was filed, then there was a special session of the General Assembly that was called in August of 2015 to redraw the congressional maps. She and I and a couple of House members worked on it, and she then introduced the bill then that we presented at that time. And one of the things we did was we looked extensively at ways in which to provide opportunity for various minorities in different places, in addition to providing the outlines of what now are the 3rd and 4th congressional districts. So I could try to track that down and make sure that we have that available when we meet on Thursday.
Okay.
And if you have any questions, just ask Senator Locke. So she was on top of all of that. So.
Okay. And yeah, this is, and certainly anybody who has questions right now, please open forum. Mr. Kumar, I see your hand up.
Madam Chair, thanks. Yeah, I would, not so much a question, but I echo that sentiment of, still maintaining what we deem to be political fairness and the reflection of reality where Virginia is right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean, again, thinking for, like you said, the independents or really the citizens here, rather than the political parties. That may well mean that there are a few that lean safely for particular parties in the right proportion, while creating a bunch of possible winnable districts for either party, which for many reasons, as we've seen, I think benefit good governance. This isn't about, hey, how many seats can each party count on, but how many seats are actually open to discourse and not extreme partisan gerrymandering, even if we end up doing it, where all someone has to do is win the primary, which can lead to a breakdown in discourse throughout our country.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for the lawyers right now? Is there any information that any of the commission members would like to have for Thursday's conversation about starting point and moving forward? Anything at all? I know we try to foresee what questions we are going to have as best we can, and I'm anticipating there will be people who have questions on Thursday with more things they would like to consider. Certainly, if those things are going to come up, there's a certain amount of that we can't anticipate. But Ms. Harris, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I believe that we have 3 additional meetings scheduled before the deadline where we're supposed to vote on the congressional meetings on Thursday of this week, Monday and Wednesday of next week. And then I guess we try to see if we have a map that we can vote on the 25th. I think that's right. I'd like to go back to one of the citizen comments earlier on whether or not we think as a commission, since there are only 11 districts and we may have relative agreement on starting with 2 that were impacted by the Voting Rights Act with the last redistricting, whether or not together we draw lines with one map drawer. How we would get to that, I really don't know. But it seems as though it was not the most efficient process to have 2 map drawers, and whether or not together as one body, we could work together to draw the rest of the other 9 district lines, and don't know the mechanics of how that would happen with such a short timeline that we're working within. But I'll throw that idea out there.
That is a wonderful question. I don't know if we would pick one map drawer. My suggestion up for consideration, this was, I've talked about it with a few commissioners, just as a thought. Up for debate, obviously, maybe not today, but that we would alternate map drawers during the drawing process and alternate chairs and work. That's the only thing that we could get there. We already saw Meg's head shaking no. Meg, would you like to just comment on why we cannot use DLS as the single map drawer, even though we would all just love to do that? Just so you can clarify for the public and for everyone else why that may not be possible or why that is not possible at this point. We want to just put it out there so that's not a lingering question for everyone. I don't know if everyone saw your disappointed head shake.
I do think it would be possible for DLS to assist with map drawing, but it would require the commission to be making very explicit decisions and very explicit instructions. And I don't know if that's what the commission is necessarily able to do at this point. So I would hate for Julie and I to end up in a situation in which we're needing to make a call that is partisan by its very nature.
So we can't sit around and say, hey, try this, try that. Let's see what it looks like. That's not in the cards. But if we were to get together and say, yes, we want these 3 counties together, draw that line right there, and everybody kind of agrees on that, that would be something that you would be able to facilitate.
Right.
But we just don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah, at that simple of a level. But I think what happens with congressional districts, and council could definitely weigh in here, is we have to end up splitting down to precinct level. Sometimes just moving census blocks around to make sure we get into that population point. So there are a lot of minute decisions that would come into the map drawing, which again, I think DLS is generally uncomfortable with being a partisan referee.
I don't blame you. Let's see, James Abrinio and then Mr. Kumar.
And just to echo what Meg says, I don't want to be positioned to where we as a commission, because of our lack of ability to come to an agreement, put them in a very difficult position. And again, I just want to echo what we all said. They've done a great job. They're in a really difficult spot. And if they're saying to us they're uncomfortable about it, I want to trust what they're saying.
Okay, Mr. Kumar?
Yeah, just a couple things, and in part because I'm not available on Thursday. I'm generally more okay starting with some version of existing maps, making changes here than we did in the prior versions for a number of the reasons that have been articulated already. That doesn't necessarily mean all of it, but at least some of it. And then second, one thought I had is I appreciate the public sentiment and Greta's sentiment. I don't see how we get there. I think we could spend the 2 weeks we have just doing that and not get there, unfortunately. But as an alternative, given that we're only talking about 11 districts, perhaps what we could ask for is that the 2 map drawers, and this is putting a lot on them, but again, unlike DLS staff, who aren't getting anything extra for all that they've put into this, we are paying the map drawers. So maybe some of our lack of compromise equals their pain, but maybe we ask that they not present anything to us separate, that they, even if they can't fully compromise, that when maps or changes are presented, they both give their thoughts together on it. And we just have maybe one solution at a time, even if it's like, this is where it is that we did, and I might have done it this way. We work off whatever version, whether we start from scratch or some version of existing maps, we ask them to present in that way. I don't know, maybe that's not actually any better than what we had, but perhaps it could be.
And Mr. Kumar, I think that's, I think we are trying to avoid having 2 dueling maps where now we're not interested in hearing the other side, getting attached to a certain configuration. And I think we are trying to avoid that. So that may be a path forward, to start with a certain piece and hear it and draw it in real time. I know that's not exciting for everyone, and we're not making decisions today. That is an option moving forward that is different than what we just tried, which did not get us where we needed to go. So that's the type of thing everybody needs to think about before Thursday and consider the pros and cons. I urge everyone, if they don't like that direction, to perhaps just propose something else that we can all consider as well. And everybody has email, and to keep that conversation going, so you don't need to wait until Thursday to have a complete redraw or new idea to drop on everyone, so that now we're trying to do the pros and cons and don't have time to think about it. So I'm just putting that out there. Senator Barker?
Just one other thing, so everybody's aware of it. Actually, for congressional districts, there has been a significant amount of shifting between parties in virtually all of the vast majority of the districts in Virginia. I think only the 3rd, the 6th, and the 8th have been all one party over the last 15 years. All other 8 districts in Virginia have shifted at least once during that time period. So we've had a lot of back and forth between Republicans and Democrats there. It's not been, there have been very few districts that have been held by one party just over the last 15 years. And at least one of those had changed not too long before that, so.
Meg?
To go back to your earlier statement about emailing, if anyone has ideas and want to email, make sure you're not replying all on any email. And if you would prefer, you're always welcome to send it to staff, and we are happy to circulate it to the full commission using blind CC. So just remembering
and also, if you don't want to email, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call someone that maybe you wouldn't have called previously and test out your suggestion. That is never a bad idea, and it would just be, you don't have to worry about anything in writing at all, and you're not kind of committing to anything specific. If you just want to try out a new idea and see how it works and see how it's received, and you may get somebody else might agree, or maybe they don't agree and you can go in a different direction, or they have questions, or you both have questions about where that might lead. So phone calls are wonderful. I think phone calls are very, very wonderful and productive to a point, but okay. So are there any other questions about our options right now, and any other sort of requests for more information or more legal thoughts that may be helpful when we are going to come back and consider what's our starting point and how are we moving forward? I think we may need more time, potentially, or we can see what we need. Well, let's see, we can see how Thursday goes and then see where we are there and see if we need another meeting in between. If we're going to draw the maps, we may need another meeting, or maybe not, I don't know. And so, yes, I think we
Co-chair.
Yes.
Greta Harris, I'm wondering, just because time is of the essence, whether or not if there is general agreement on the commission that a starting point potentially could be districts, I believe they're 3 and 4, understanding that there will have to be some adjustments based on population shifts. But if we start with those, if there's general agreement that we want to try to keep those 2 districts intact, that we encourage the public to submit updated congressional maps, but starting with those 2 districts, and then see what kind of ideas we get between now and Thursday as we go forward.
Okay. What is there any, does anyone have any thoughts about that? Anyone?
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Senator
This is McDougall. I think that as we've gone through this, we're in a virtual meeting. I don't think we can build consensus in a virtual meeting because that would violate the rules. So I think that we can all talk about it, all express our ideas, but I do think that we run into some problems if we try to give direction in a meeting when we're virtual.
Okay. I think that's largely right. This is an information gathering process, but if anyone wants to express where they are on this, we can start to kind of count noses, I think the phrase is called, and go from there. Mr. Abrinio?
I don't think we're making a vote in, I think, informational gathering, and something that I think is pretty clear, makes sense. I think even from Brian as well as Kareem, I think it makes sense. I don't know if that's official action, if there's an opinion, a legal opinion about whether or not we can do that, but it just makes sense.
Well, here, I will ask the question this way. Is there anyone who is sitting on the commission right now that has strong objections to what we've been discussing, and we would love to hear that other side of the comment now without making any decisions. Is there any red flag that someone would like to present?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Sean Kumar. No red flag. I think so long as we're not giving exclusive direction, what we're doing is we're generating ideas that possible avenues the commissioners would like to explore so that our attorneys and map drawers can take action between now and the next meeting. We're not coming to any consensus. So I'm not raising any red flags, but I want to continue as you have to urge people that if they've got things that they'd like considered or looked into for when we meet again, so we can analyze and move consensus forward, we have to use all the time we have well. So I appreciate what you're doing with this meeting.
Okay, are there any other thoughts for Thursday's meeting? What I have right now, things that need to be, since we will be in person and things we can actually do, we need to either kind of officially confirm or have consensus around a starting point and a loose process at a minimum. And then we need to have anything else that needs to be said about the state maps. I think obviously we've had some comment today from citizens who, even though somehow it was confirmed to the media, we weren't doing anything more. I didn't confirm anything, and I don't think DLS actually confirmed anything. There could be some confusion for the citizens as to where we're going here, and we want to make sure that they don't waste time if we're not going to be working on it or considering it. So everyone just consider how they wish to proceed at that point on Thursday, if we're going to do anything official or unofficial. If anyone has any, again, strong opinions in the opposite direction, after a number of phone calls this weekend, it wasn't necessarily, not everyone shared my view, so I do not want to supplant my view for everyone else's. And if we are reaching a consensus of not pursuing the state maps, and I think it needs to be a consensus and we need to just talk about it. So I'll just throw that out there. So that will be an item for Thursday, one way or the other. And is there anything else that needs to be, or that any commission members would like to see on the agenda for Thursday?
Madam Chair, this is Delegate Adams.
Yes, Delegate Adams.
Yeah, hi. I just think it may be important to address the question of the status of the commission, status of the membership, I suppose, following, the demonstrations from last meeting. I saw the email from Amigo Wade indicating that the co-chair Harris has not resigned. Of course, she's on this meeting now. But the statement was that she was removing herself from the commission, not from just that meeting. And, I just don't know the answer to this, but I'm not aware of any reason that a verbal resignation is not effective in Virginia. And I think that's going to be important before we come back and start taking votes, that we have some clarification as to, what exactly we have here, because I could, obviously we've had other members who have removed themselves from the commission. I think, 2 previous, but, we do, and obviously we have the individual power to resign, but I don't think stands to reason we have the individual power to reassign ourselves to something that has been effectively resigned from. So I don't know if that is, if we need, I think we need to have some sort of legal discussion about that and see where we are prior to moving forward with any votes cast in a meeting that we have a proper quorum.
Madam Co-Chair, can I respond to Delegate Adams?
We've got lots of hands raised, so sure. And then we'll hear from Rick, and then we'll hear from James. And I don't know what the answer is, so maybe council wants to opine something. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if Delegate Adams wants to go back and watch the live feed, my statement was I removed myself from the commission at this point. That was referencing that particular meeting, not to resign from the commission. Those words did not cross my lips. There's no need for me to try to reinstate myself because I never took myself out of leadership or membership of the commission. Certainly you can do whatever you want to from a legal exploration, but from my perspective, I've never resigned, made that clear to DLS staff, made it clear to the media on Friday, and subsequently those comments or headlines were adjusted to reflect the fact that I'm still a member of the commission. Thank you.
Mr. Harrell.
I just want to say that I thoroughly agree with Delegate Adams. I think a common sense reading of what I heard in person was not what I just heard 5 seconds ago. And I'm not going to argue the point now, but I think it should be an item of discussion. Thank you.
Mr. Brenio.
Madam Chair.
And then Mr. Kumar. We have more hands up about this topic than we did about our procedure. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this suggestion and this line of discussion kind of shows the point as to why the meeting ended so abruptly on Friday. Madam Co-Chair Harris made valid points. We made valid compromises and it wasn't respected. It also highlights the point and importance of this amendment, at least as I see it. It gives these citizens the ability to take action, whereas legislatures wouldn't. It allows us to interject ourselves in what we think is an unfair and uncompromising process. And it was an important thing to do. I suspect if the Republicans want to have a vote on it, we're going to reach the same 8-8 vote. And it's just more of the circle. And this has kind of been my point from day one. Every time that we try to move the ball forward, we've had a cordial discussion today. Now they throw another wrench into the game, and it's just another effort to go around in circles. So I hope that in the line of and spirit of compromise, as we heard so many speeches from the other side on Friday, that we're not going to address this any further and we'll move forward. But if we have to, then we'll have to, and we'll have a vote on it. So thank you.
Mr. Kumar.
I mean, I think this line, Madam Chair, is absolutely absurd. We just heard her clarify. She told staff, she has, whether you agree with how she expressed her frustration in her actions last week or not, the woman has put in, like you have, an amazing amount of work, blood, sweat, and tears away from this, as all citizens have, and the two of you more than anyone. And for anyone to try to raise this, there are members of this commission, including Delegate Adams, who have been non-responsive at times and delayed our work for weeks, if not longer, including people not getting back on stage. And so this is a woman who has put in the work and has said that she is on the commission. Let's just get past this and move forward.
That's Senator Stanley and then Senator Locke.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I would assume that what the Delegate Adams was talking about was perhaps just to make sure, because as we move forward through this, we don't want anything to be challenged later in a court of law that someone might say by her actions, this happened. And so anything that we did thereafter was not right, just, or legal. I take no position as to whether she resigned or not. I understood her frustration and was disappointed when 3 of our commissioners got up and left when we were trying to find a way to continue to move forward. That end result wasted 2 days, wasted Saturday, the opportunity, actually wasted all of Friday. I stayed here in Richmond anticipating working on Saturday and was here Monday anticipating to work on this because we had a deadline. I don't think Delegate Adams is what he's trying to do is stir the pot. I would think, knowing Delegate Adams as I do, probably we just need, if the attorneys are satisfied that by her actions and her words, she did not resign, and that does not affect the commission, then I'm good with it. I certainly do not make the argument that Mr. Brinio or Mr. Hutchins, they said nothing by any means, then create a situation where they had resigned. I don't think that's the issue. I want to move forward. I want to move absolutely forward with due diligence to get these congressional lines drawn. I think if we can put that issue to bed, then that's fine. Let's just move forward. Let's get this done together. Let's pick up where we left off and not give up anymore. But I think, this all just is the frustration that's bubbling underneath with all of us. We've got to put some of this aside one way or the other. But ultimately, I think we wasted the opportunity to actually find a consensus and to get some state maps out in the House and the Senate when those three persons got up and left. And that's disappointing. I understand their frustrations. I do. And I'm sure Mr. Kumar is going to be like, here's another speech from Stanley that doesn't match his actions. But I've not been on this commission as long as you all. And certainly I think that's a blessing, even though I've been here for the most contentious part. But let's move forward. Let's not forget how we kind of dropped the ball in the fact that we wasted those days, those precious days where we could have at least given it a shot to get the ball across the goal line. And instead we're here with just a little bit of time left to try to do the work that we can in the congressional maps, or maybe even on a long ball throw, find some consensus on the House or Senate map. So I don't think, and I don't mean to speak for Mr. Adams, but I don't think what he's trying to do is create a stir again, to create this division between Republican or Democrat. I think it's merely, let's get some legal ruling on that. I anticipate that legal ruling will be that she did not resign, and we'll just move forward. But not everything that anybody says always has to be partisan. We are commissioners. We did not guarantee by this law a partisan map. It was a bipartisan effort. That's what it was supposed to be, to not draw a partisan map. And so everybody's just ready to pull the pointed sticks out. And maybe we ought to put them back in the quiver and get back to work, okay? Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Okay, I've got Senator Locke, then Mr. Feliciano, then Mr. Kumar, and then Mr. Abrinio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As much as I would love to agree with my colleague from the Senate, Senator Stanley, much of the discussion up to this point was about how we do move forward. And I thought that we had reached a point where we felt that we could indeed do that. And then we get this comment that does appear to indeed stir the pot and disrupt the commission's work, and have this circling of the wagons of pointing a finger at a commissioner who clarifies what her position was, and that clarification had come already about what the position was. And that in and of itself is disappointing because comments came from commissioners who have been disagreeable with comments that had been made by this commissioner throughout the process. So that is what I find disappointing. That is what I find disruptive. And I'm sorry, Senator Stanley, my dear friend, that is stirring the pot. Thank you.
Mr. Feliciano.
Madam Co-Chair and both Madam Co-Chairs, I'll be clear. Up until a few moments ago, I would have agreed that I believe that Co-Chair Harris had resigned. But at the moment this discussion in the last 10 minutes started, while I'm on this, I went on my other device and watched those moments. And I will say that now I do not believe, I agree with what Ms. Harris said. I don't think she resigned because I listened to it. So I agree with Senator Adams. We need to have lawyers make sure and just cross the T's and dot the I's because, you know, this is America. Everybody's suing everybody. But to other comments about if this came down to a vote, and here we are, 8-8. I do not believe at this point that Ms. Harris resigned, and I would not vote saying that I believe she did. If that will help anyone thinking that something will come down off party lines in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Felicia. I want to put it, I don't think we should have a vote at all on this. I think it was a point of clarification from Delegate Adams, and we're getting an answer from, we got something from Dr. Creighton, and I mean, we will move forward and we're going to move forward. So that's, I'm sort of with Senator Stanley on this, that the point was just brought up for protection of legal moving on. And so I don't see any value in sitting down and having a vote for one of our members and then trying to actually move forward and talk. So why don't we go to, okay, let me see, Mr. Abrinio, and then I see Senator Locke's hand back up.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Abrinio.
And I'm not going to belabor the point. I want to say that I appreciate Jose's comments. It demonstrates genuineness. And all I want to say, there's been a lot of things in the media about what happened last Friday. I just urge everybody, this has been a long process. That was a long meeting. Go and watch the video for yourself and make your own determination. I think that where I'm having difficulty, and maybe it's my fault, maybe this is the way political speak happens, where you have discussions that are articulate and they're persuasive, but at the end of the day, they ring hollow to me. So I would just suggest in the future, if we're going to have these discussions, if my friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to reach out to me personally, let's have a real discussion. And big words and long speeches just aren't persuasive to me. It's frustrating because we're making, I think, serious discussion, and then we hear speeches about how we're failing to compromise. And I'm not trying to, again, stir the spot, but if you're trying to actually be persuasive to me, have a real talk with me. I'm not a politician, and this is not the way I think citizens operate. So thank you.
Senator McDougall, I see your hand up. You're muted.
Thank you. Candidly, I've debated whether I should say anything or not, but a couple comments have spurred me to do it. And talking directly to Mr. Abrinio, I guess, on some heartfelt points, I want to go through in clear speak my perceptions and maybe how we do come across and fail to see each other's points. Y'all may or may not know, but my wife is a college professor at an institution in Central Virginia. Through my political career, there have been more than one occasions when I've had to listen to her tell me about the visceral negative reaction of some of her academic colleagues to votes that I have taken. Those things have been at times very offensive to me because her views are in no way reflected in how I vote. Certainly I listen to her, certainly she can express her opinion just like every other constituent, but she's her own person. She makes her own decisions. I don't prescribe to teach her classes or tell her how to do her job, and she doesn't do the job for which I was elected. But certainly things like that, listening that her colleagues would not even sit beside her at an academic meeting because of a vote I take, definitely influences how I view the world and how I view things. So as we go through the process of dealing with this commission, I think we all bring in to consideration views and ideas we've had. Certainly those of us in the Senate, I think maybe different than the House, have tried to work very hard over the years because we've had to, because we've either been at 2020 or 2019 one way, 2019 the other way, or some variation thereof. We've tried to work to bring consensus because we know when you throw things up for a vote, sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't, but it's very hard to come to conclusions when you don't bring consensus. Not everybody has liked my position on this. I've had direct conversations with the co-chairs, direct conversations with other members saying, as a group, we need not force things to votes, because at the end of the day, the vote that had to occur would include 3 or 4 legislators and 6 citizen members. So it had to be a consensus. It couldn't be one side jam their ideas down the other. So we went through this process. There were things that frustrated me. I, unlike some of my elected colleagues, felt very strongly that incumbent addresses should not be used. I actually refused to give my personal incumbent address until Ms. Lamb begged me, because I was the only one who had not done so. We went through a process where we had a vote on that, came to agreement, and then at one point that changed at somewhere along the way. We had conversations about political data. I think I was one of the few elected officials that said, let's not do political data at the beginning. Let's work through the other guidance that we all seem to come to agreement on, and work things through. When we came to last week, October 1st and 2nd, we had lots of conversations, and y'all remember that I was extremely frustrated on that Saturday when on the Senate maps, and we'll talk specifically about that, when neither map jar came back with what I felt was very clear and explicit direction from the commission to work on Hampton roads and not have Senate lines traverse the Chesapeake Bay. So the peninsula would be together, Southampton roads would be together, and to work toward finding a solution with 5 majority minority Senate districts. We went through public hearing last week. We heard from many people that that was something the citizens also felt were very important. We have all spent a tremendous amount of time trying to come to resolutions through individual conversations, sitting in meetings away from our family and work, and stressful because for all of us, it's a lot of pressure. Last Wednesday, I received a phone call from one of the commissioners talking about, could we find consensus on the Senate map? I thought we could. They told me they were working on something. And I said, great. Said, well, I hope to have it done by early afternoon, 2:30 or 3. The next day, I said, well, I'm in something until about 6:30. So as soon as I get done, we can talk about it or look at it, whatever you would like. I talked to the commissioner on the 7th of October. And in that conversation, they indicated they had not finished it. It was still a work in progress. They were going to try to have it finished for the next day. And I said, look forward to working with you. Please don't make it a surprise. And then we came forward on the 8th. And the 8th, we all knew it was going to be a long day. We were all prepared to spend a lot of time there. I'd lined up a babysitter for my daughter that was going to be there till 9:30. So I knew I had most of the day prepared to be there. And through that process, candidly, I was pretty surprised to see a new map that was dropped on us. I had not seen it. I don't know if any other commissioners had seen it. I don't know if any other commissioners had directed that it be drawn, because it seemed to me when we left that on the 2nd, it was pretty clear that we wanted all the maps at that point to be out to the public. Even I remember Meg, because I felt really bad, her anniversary was on the 2nd, and she didn't want to have to load up anything that night. She asked us that I won't get it loaded till tomorrow because her anniversary, and I felt really bad about that. And then as I listened to some of the comments from citizens today and from some of the others, that they feel like some of us have not reasonably compromised. And when you talk about reasonable compromise, it's not dropping a map that the commission has not directed be done. that takes some of the provisions that the commission had agreed on, like keeping existing political subdivisions for counties and cities together, undo that, and then say, if you don't move that particular map forward, you're being unreasonable. On Friday, as I had individual conversations with commissioners, one-on-one, because we couldn't talk in groups larger than 2, I thought we were still working toward a resolution. I was trying, and I thought the other commissioner that I was talking with was trying too. Now, we had some substantive differences of opinion. They were very candid with me in conversations over the telephone early in the week and that night that they thought compromise on the Senate maps would ultimately result in a map that would elect 22 Democrats. I told them very directly, I did not read the language in the statute to say not favor or disfavor as meaning one political party would have an advantage. And I said, we need to have more maps that are competitive. So when we're talking to each other, I do think it's important that we be clear. I do think it's important that we not talk past each other. And I do think it's important that we understand that from my perspective, I thought Friday of last week was a total sandbag, a total setup. When I saw a map that took some of the public comment from a certain part of the state and disregarded some of the public comment from that certain part of the state to draw a map that looked to me to be a very clear political gerrymander, that I saw in Senate maps 10 years ago, that felt to me like there was not a willingness to come to a resolution. But even through all that, even with that very strong feeling, you have to put that aside. I didn't say, let's stop. I'm not negotiating with you anymore. You totally were dishonest with me with what you led me to believe, and I'm not going to have any more conversations. Said we got to build consensus. We got to work together. I spent the weekend going through probably what would be referred to as the different stages of grief. I was in shock on Friday. I became very angry. My daughter actually made me feel really bad as well. Came to me on Saturday and said, did I do anything wrong? I said, no, darling, you didn't do anything wrong. This is not your fault. You've been very supportive with the amount of time that I've not been able to go to your events or take you to school or talk about your homework over the last month and a half. So when we go forward and come together on Thursday, I hope that all the commissioners, regardless of how you got appointed or selected, will think about those things. Will think about how the actions that are presented seem to other people. And when there appears to be a strong push to a definitive vote to lock in a position, that does not feel like an effort to compromise. That feels very strongly like somebody is trying to lock in a record for the Supreme Court to look at. So I do believe that this commission can move forward, that we can work together. But I think we're going to have to talk to each other honestly and candidly as we do that. I think we're going to have the conversation about what does political neutrality look like? Does that mean what I believe it means? To be clear for any record, is I believe it means no one party is put in control as a result of a gerrymandered map for the next 10 years. I believe it means that there will be competitive elections, that the ideas of the individuals or the parties that they're affiliated with articulate to the public, and the public, through their votes, will decide the individuals or parties that will control the House or Senate or our congressional delegation over the next decade. So when we're coming together to work, let's try not to say, oh, you don't want to work because of this, or you didn't try because of this. and think about how the actions and the statements and some of the way that ideas are presented can make everybody not feel like their ideas are being heard, not feel like there's a real effort to compromise, but make them feel like there's an effort to score points for a record that a court will look at in the future. There are a number of us that are attorneys on this call and on this commission, and we're used to making records. We're used to having our words dissected. I'm sure everything I'm saying is going to be dissected at some point, and a judge or panel of judge or entire court looking at it and make a decision about what we intended or thought or what we wanted to do. We came up with guidance on the legislative maps. At some point in time, our effort to try to make sure we had finality quickly got in the way of us working together to come to a conclusion. So I've not given up my optimism. My daughter, even though she has a flexible learning today, reminded me, said, Diddy, you can still work through problems even when there are differences. It's pretty bad when your 10-year-old has to tell you not to give up and to continue to have hope. But I do still have hope that going forward, we can not talk past each other, not talk down to each other, and that when our actions are one way, that we realize that maybe that is sending a very stark message to the rest of the commission about what our real intentions are. So we can't make any decisions today. We should not make any decisions today because that's the law. But when we come together on Thursday, I hope that we will be talking to each other to build consensus. And again, I beg that this commission not take the path of just throwing up votes to create the record, to try to make sure that when lawyers that are not on the commission argue these to courts, that they're in a better position. That should not be our goal. That should not be what we're trying to do. If we can't work it out, we can't work it out. But it shouldn't be because we were unwilling to try.
Okay, I'm going to say something kind of brief, piggybacking on a little bit of that, and then Mr. Abrinio, absolutely. I did talk to some people over the weekend on both sides, and I would just say that it seemed as though there was just a fundamental lack of trust of each other's motives, and each side was not on the offense, but on the defense and suspicious of the other side's motives. And that's kind of how we got here. And it was difficult to kind of recover. I think that hopefully everyone can look across and see that simply because somebody votes a certain way or doesn't like a certain thing, that there might not be just a ulterior motive involved, but maybe there's just a reason, and maybe you need to talk about it and have conversation. And I would ask that commissioners do that, have some conversations. Don't lump everybody in. Just because everybody voted a certain way doesn't mean that they all had the same reason for voting a certain way. And it was interesting that both sides thought the same about the other side, saying exactly the same things, which just brings us to, there's the fundamental lack of trust. And to build that back up, we need to be having the conversations. I know because of COVID, we didn't have the opportunity to get to know each other as maybe we would have liked to. We're all terrified of FOIA and having meetings. Amigo scared me about having meetings because we could talk about something, then it wasn't noticed. But wouldn't this have all have been better if we had gotten to know each other a little more deeply than just, and that's what needed to happen to replace you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. We automatically probably don't agree on anything. So that's how we got here. And it was always in the process. Politics are in the process, and we tried to not have them in the process. It's never going to happen. It's in the statute. Politics is in the statute. Political fairness, we don't even agree on what political fairness means. So I don't know how we're ever able to quantify it. By the way, just to all of the entities who would like to help, I really appreciate that. Our issue really, though, is we don't agree on what it means. So I don't know how we would ever quantify it. But I do want to thank all of the entities for reaching out and trying to help us determine political fairness. But that's a deeper issue. So kind of with that, I hope just moving towards Thursday that everybody maybe picks up the phone and calls somebody that they wouldn't normally talk to or agree with, and just see where y'all are and note that you are more than what your party affiliation is. There's a lot of diverse views in our group. There really is. Everybody doesn't agree. I mean, everyone that I've talked to definitely doesn't agree on a specific issue, but it may lead them to vote a certain way. But that doesn't mean we lump them all together and say you're wrong, and we don't like it, and we're failing to compromise. So that's sort of my piece. I didn't really say anything on, I think it was Friday, but that is my observation of how we got here, where we are, to people, to the citizens that got this amendment passed. I know you'll keep working. I think you need to either take politics out or put it in a way that makes more sense. But it did not work this way. But I still think maybe congressional maps, there's still room to talk about it. It's just, it'll be less personal. And the incumbency issue isn't the problem. So just, I think we can keep going. We just have to set aside how we got here and try to keep an open mind and keep the conversation and talk about things, maybe why we disagree, to talk about it instead of just assume the worst on either side. So Mr. Abrinio, go ahead.
So first of all, I want to say to Meg, I apologize if we made you miss your anniversary. It's very unfortunate. And again, I want to thank the DLS staff for everything they've done. So thank you, genuinely. To Ryan, and I'm going to call you Ryan because it looks like we're going to try to have some real talk here. I'm sorry to your daughter. I do not mean to, and I don't think anybody on this commission means to bring her stress. I'm sorry to your wife and whether or not she's mistreated. Individuals that treat other people disrespectfully, I don't agree with that regardless of politics. I don't think that's fair. And I see people even on my side of the aisle be disrespectful. So that's not where I'm coming from. And you got personal, so I'll get personal. On Friday, you all probably know I have a pregnant wife. She's 6 months. I'm super excited. First baby on the way. I missed her first doctor's appointment. I've been to all of the OBGYN doctor's appointment until Friday. And so it's with that I say that I take this duty of service so important, that where you're missing important things like that in your lives, I hope that both of us on both sides of the aisle can say, we're taking this duty very seriously. Coincidentally, as Friday's happening, I got a text about a good friend of mine who had some serious health issues. So we all have life that is happening to us. This weekend, because I think of my own stress, you're not the only one who went through the stages of grief. I was so stressed that I ended up calling my therapist, and for just everybody here knows I work with National Alliance of Mental Illness. I want to be open with people. Like, this is real. The stress here is real. And so the goal of NAMI is to end the stigma. Here I am. I'm telling you that the stress caused by this, I had to call my therapist, and he gave me some good advice. And it was as simple as hug your wife. And it was just great. I don't take this lightly. And I can tell you with honesty that our goal was not to sandbag you. The goal there was to offer a 50-50 compromise. Here's your map, here's our map. We said B7 or B6 or whatever it was, because that was the most recent iteration. I hadn't studied it in great detail, but my understanding is it was in response to public comment previously provided. Heck, it was really, and I think we articulated, and that's the frustration that I have here about building records and wondering what journalists' sound bites will pick up, who was right, who was wrong, and trying to win it up in the media. At the end of the day, and I'm going to use I statements, I felt that we had made a very reasonable compromise to begin a starting point so we could have an oriented discussion, get feedback from the public. And what's concerning to me is, and again, I'm not addressing you, but how I feel about the situation is that morning I got a letter in my inbox from the House leader of the House of House of Delegates from the Republican Party saying that because we had not already provided clarification, that he was already going to vote down the maps. That's how I started that morning, getting that letter, that because our lack of clarity and inability to compromise, that he inherently was done with it. And the reality is, even if we do pass legislation or maps here, I've already seen indication that we're going to be sued. We're going to be sued left and right, and there's going to be litigation over the next 10 years. And one of the things that I think everybody is missing here is that the idea of the Supreme Court ending up being the ones drawing the maps is a legal, explicit outcome that was envisioned in this amendment. Having the maps being drawn by the Supreme Court is not a failure because we were unable to compromise as the amendment was intended. It's there as essentially a stopgap. And us as citizens, it interjects us in the ability to say, look, we have lost faith in this commission's ability to draw fair maps. And therefore, we want the Supreme Court to do their duty, which we know they could. Now, I've even seen things about how us citizens that walked out made a grave mistake because the Supreme Court is conservative and therefore it's going to be conservative maps and all that. I can tell you sitting here today, I don't know what's going to happen in the Supreme Court. I don't think the Supreme Court cares about whether Ryan and I have a disagreement about who is right or wrong. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. You know, I may have in those decisions hurt the Democratic Party overall, but talking about children, again, I'm getting ready to, God willing, I'm going to be a father soon. My ultimate analysis of whether I felt comfortable about the decision I made on Friday and going forward is when my daughter is 10 years old and she starts learning about me, am I happy that I had the best intentions in mind? And that was for the protection of the people of the Commonwealth and making a legal decision and exercising my duty faithfully to the Constitution. I can sleep well at night. I don't know what ultimately happens with all this. I'm here to listen. I'm not here to cast aside things. I'm here to compromise. So I'm just telling you, that's how I feel. And I hope you appreciate that for honesty. You may not, and it is what it is, but I'm just telling you, I'm here to talk if you want to talk.
Madam Chairman, this is Ryan again, and I want to say, James, thank you. And my name is Ryan. Mama did not change my name when I got elected, so it's been that way for 49, soon to be 50 years. And my wife got her PhD in psychology, so I don't have to call anybody to get those types of services because they're readily available, whether I want them or not. I get them very frequently. But I think that this is the type of conversation that is probably important and we needed to have. You had a very strong feeling about a direction of how things were going Friday. I had a very strong feeling about how it was being set up politically in a negative direct way, and thought I was working through in individual conversations a pathway forward that could come up with a resolution. And we all just talked past each other through life's interferences, through stresses. I know about family illnesses and challenges, and I know about very high risk childbirth, and so I can understand the stress that puts you under in direction. And I appreciate you being willing to talk about that here today, and the fact that we are talking, and as a group, this is the first time anybody's in Virginia has done this. I think our setup is different, if I understand from what Meg has told us over the years, than other states. It is not an easy process. And the more we can have the conversations and learn lessons, hopefully we get it right on congressional districts, but regardless, somebody will be able to learn about processes and directions after us for the next group to do it. Because I promise you, in 10 years, I will not be on this commission, because there's no way in heck I would ever accept an appointment again in the future.
I think we've
but
reached
thank you,
consensus
James.
on that. So thank you.
Okay, so we have had the airing of the grievances for any Seinfeld fans at this point.
Well, Madam Chair, this Delegate Adams.
Yes, Delegate Adams.
Right. And, really, again, to my point, he was raising the legal question, and whether we acknowledge it or not, the words and the actions we take have legal ramifications, and we have counsel. And I think this is something that needs to be looked into in terms of what I raised. Now, I think as far as the discussion that ensued after I raised it, I mean, that really highlights, I think, a lot of what we've seen before. And, I'm not going to return in kind the, challenge to motivations. In my professional career, that's just not acceptable. And it's certainly not helpful in trying to reach a consensus. I mean, there have been times during the course of this commission's work, I've, with the area of the state that I'm most familiar with, I've sided with the Democrat map maker, for instance. Every vote hasn't gone my way, but I haven't complained about a vote that didn't go my way because I kept moving forward. And likewise, it never even occurred to me to challenge the motivation someone may have, and especially not to do so publicly. I really think that has been, and I think this has been suggested before by other commissioners, that is probably one of the worst thing that's been tolerated, and really just came to a head on Friday. And so I too would like to see that aspect where comments are made from objective standpoints, and recognizing that people come from different perspectives. That's how it should go forward in a professional way. And so, on this question, on this specific legal question, it's not, I'm not calling for a vote. Obviously, if the legal memorandum or whatever it is that comes back, or just thoughts from the attorneys after they look at this, and it's a clear answer, one way or the other, we have a clear answer. If it's up to interpretation or debate, then I'm not calling for a vote on this. I'm not looking to do that. Then we'll take the decision of Co-Chair Harris on her position and what she's deciding to do, and we'll just go forward. But in terms of it being something that, as a legal matter, needs to be looked at, there's just I think that's very reasonable and ought to be done before the next round of votes are cast. Thank you.
Okay, and we have Dr. Creighton's position is in writing already. He had to leave, so I'll just put that to Mr. Tyson. You can confirm or not confirm. Just let us know maybe by the end, maybe by 1 p.m. Is that too short a notice? And then we can have something documenting, we can have it in writing, and we can move forward. Does that work for you, Mr. Tyson?
Madam Co-Chair, yes, that okay. I think we can make that work. Mr. Bartolomucci we're going to look at this, and so okay. I don't think that's a reasonable timeline.
And so we just have something documenting, and it'll be documented, and we will be good. We'll be good moving forward. Okay, I really don't want to ask if anyone else has any other things they would like to bring up at this point. I think we are at a wonderful stopping place. We've done public comment. Hold on, I see 2 more messages. Is there a plan with respect to when public input will be considered on Thursday? Okay, well, Ms. Carlin, what I think that was a message from Ms. Carlin, a question that was posted in the chat. So I want to make sure that we address that openly, so people can plan accordingly. I think we've been more successful, and I don't want to make that call alone. So, but I think we have been more successful having the public comment earlier on, and that has been a good place to start. And it's been directing the conversation of our meeting. So let's plan on doing it how we've been doing it, unless you hear otherwise. But Ms. Harris is the one who will be running the meeting on Thursday, at least as far as I know at this point. Let's plan on that. So she will make that final call. So this is my suggestion, that we continue doing things as we have been doing. I think that it's been good, and we can then discuss actively what the public comment has been instead of trying to remember what it was from the last meeting. Okay. I am going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting, wait for more emails, and hopefully everyone will have some more positive phone calls. Okay. Thank you.